The cold steel of the handcuffs felt like an insult against my skin, a sharp contrast to the Italian silk of my sleeves. I stood in the center of my father's mahogany-lined office, the empire I helped build, while two federal agents methodically stripped my life away. Across the desk, my sister Julia didn't cry. She didn't even look away. She sat in our father's leather chair, slowly rotating a heavy gold signet ring on her index finger, the ring that was supposed to be buried with our father's body 3 days ago. As they led me toward the door, she whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "The weak inherit nothing, Elias. They only occupy space." But to understand how I ended up a prisoner in my own legacy, we have to go back to the night the rain washed away the last of the Keating family's dignity. 6 months ago, our father, Marcus Keating, was the undisputed king of private health care. His word was law, and his wealth was a fortress. We were the golden duo, Julia, the sharp-edged strategist, and I, the operational hand. We lived in a world of sterile marble floors and silent boardrooms, a world where the only thing more valuable than a patient's life was the data we held on them. The friction began at the reading of the temporary directive. We were gathered in the library of the estate, a sprawling glass and stone monument to excess. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and the expensive, cloying perfume our mother used to wear. Our family lawyer, Arthur Vance, a man who had been our father's shadow for 30 years, sat with a file that felt heavier than it should. Julia was restless. She kept adjusting the hem of her black dress, her eyes darting to the safe behind the desk. I noticed it then, a small, barely visible detail that felt like a splinter in my mind. When Vance handed her the initial inventory of the trust, she signed the acknowledgement with her left hand. The room went silent, but my heart began to hammer against my ribs. Julia isn't left-handed. She never has been. I watched her hand move with a strange, practiced stiffness, the gold signet ring catching the dim light. I looked at Vance, expecting him to say something, to correct her, to offer a wry comment about her sudden change in dexterity. But he just nodded, his face a mask of professional indifference, and tucked the paper away. In that moment, the first crack appeared in the foundation. I realized that the man sitting across from me wasn't just my father's lawyer, and the woman sitting next to me wasn't just my sister. They were players in a game I hadn't even realized had started. The silence that followed the signing wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of things unsaid. Arthur Vance didn't linger. He packed his leather briefcase with the rhythmic precision of a man who had performed this ritual 1,000 times, leaving Julia and me alone in a room that suddenly felt too large. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the spot on the desk where the document had been, her left hand still resting on the polished wood as if she were trying to remember how to be herself again. "You're tired, Elias," she said, her voice devoid of any sisterly warmth. "The funeral, the press. You should go back to your apartment. I'll handle the transition team for the Chicago clinic." "The Chicago clinic is my project, Julia," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Father put me in charge of that expansion for a reason. Why the sudden interest in the logistics?" She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were like shards of flint. "Because the board doesn't want operational hands right now. They want stability. And right now, you look like you're one bad headline away from a breakdown." She left before I could argue. The scent of her perfume, that same sharp floral note our mother favored, lingering in the air like a threat. I didn't go home. Instead, I stayed in the library, the left-handed signature burned into my retina. It was a small thing, but in our family, small things were usually the tips of icebergs. I began to dig. Our father was a man of absolute order. He kept a backup of every digital correspondence in a secure offline server located in the estate's basement. It was old school, paranoid, and exactly what I needed. But when I reached the keypad, the code, my birthday, a code that hadn't changed in a decade, returned a flat, red, "access denied." My stomach turned. Someone was scrubbing me out of the system. I spent the next 4 hours in my father's private study, going through physical files. Most were mundane: tax returns, insurance policies, charity donations. But then, tucked inside a leather-bound copy of Meditations, I found a weathered, yellowed envelope. It wasn't a legal document. It was a bill from a private detective agency dated 32 years ago, addressed to my mother, not my father. The bill was for discreet surveillance and biological verification. As I stared at the paper, a soft floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, expecting to see Julia or a security guard. Instead, the room was empty, but the heavy scent of that floral perfume was suddenly overwhelming, as if someone had just stepped out of the shadows. I looked down at the envelope again and noticed a handwritten note on the back. "The blood doesn't lie, even if the paperwork does. Check the vault in the Alpine house." It wasn't my mother's handwriting, it was my father's, and the date on the bill was exactly 9 months before Julia was born. Part 3. The Alpine Shadow. The revelation in the library felt like a slow-acting poison. If my father had been investigating his own wife's fidelity before Julia was born, then the golden legacy we were fighting over was built on a foundation of sand. I tucked the detective's bill into my inner pocket, the paper crinkling like a warning against my chest. The Alpine house was a secluded glass cabin in the mountains, a place my father went to disappear when the pressure of the pharmaceutical empire became too much. No one had been there in years. It was a 3-hour drive, and as I sped through the winding mountain roads, the headlights of a black SUV stayed exactly 4 car lengths behind me for 50 miles. Every time I slowed, it slowed. Every time I floored it, the dark shape followed. Someone didn't just want me out of the company, they wanted me watched. I reached the cabin just as a storm began to claw at the pines. The air was thin and freezing. I used my emergency key, half expecting the lock to be changed, but it turned with a heavy, satisfying click. Inside, the house smelled of cedar and abandonment. I didn't go for the main safe in the floor. My father was a man of layers. I went to the old grandfather clock in the hallway, the one he had always insisted on winding himself, even when his hands shook with age. I opened the back casing. There, magnetized to the internal iron frame, was a small silver flash drive and a single handwritten medical report. My eyes scanned the lines, and the world tilted. It was a fertility report for Elias Keating. Dated 2 years before Julia's birth, the conclusion was absolute: permanent sterility due to childhood illness complications. I sat on the cold floor, the wind howling outside. If our father couldn't have biological children, then what were we? Was I adopted? Was Julia the product of an affair? Suddenly, the front door creaked open. I froze, my hand hovering over the flash drive. A man stepped into the foyer, shaking the rain off a dark umbrella. It wasn't a hitman, it was Arthur Vance, our family lawyer. He looked older in the dim light, his eyes hollowed out by shadows. "I expected you'd come here, Elias," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Your father was a man of many secrets, but he was also a man of immense guilt." "Did you know?" I hissed, holding up the medical report. "Did you know he couldn't have children? Who am I, Arthur? Who is Julia?" Vance stepped closer, the smell of his expensive tobacco mixing with the damp mountain air. "The truth is a luxury you can't afford right now. Julia has already filed a motion to have you removed as a trustee. She's using your erratic behavior, this midnight drive, your obsession with old files, as proof that you're mentally unfit to lead." "She's my sister," I yelled. Vance gave a sad, thin smile. "Is she? Or is she just the person who holds the keys to the kingdom you think is yours?" He reached out his hand. "Give me the drive, Elias. I can protect you. I can make sure you get a settlement that will keep you comfortable for life. But if you walk out that door with it, Julia won't just take your money, she'll take your freedom." I looked at him, then at the drive. I remembered the left-handed signature. I remembered how Vance hadn't blinked when she signed it. And then I saw it. On Vance's own wrist, partially hidden by his cuff, was a watch. The exact same limited edition Patek Philippe my father supposedly lost a month before he died. The lawyer wasn't here to protect me. He was here to finish the job. Part 4. The Architect of Ruin. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to amplify, matching the frantic beat of my heart. I looked from the medical report to the watch on Vance's wrist. The watch my father had cherished, now worn by his lawyer like a trophy. The betrayal wasn't just corporate, it was visceral. "The watch, Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Father told me he lost it at the club. But he didn't, did he? You took it. Or maybe he gave it to you as payment for a silence I'm only just beginning to understand." Vance didn't flinch. He didn't even try to hide the watch. Instead, he slowly folded his umbrella. Marcus was a man of grand gestures, Elias. He knew the end was coming. He knew that the empire he built was a house of cards, held together by the Keating name. He didn't want his children to tear it down with a scandal that would bankrupt the foundations. "His children?" I spat. According to this report, he didn't have any. "The drive, Elias. Give it to me." Vance stepped forward, his tone shifting from gentle to glacial. "You're playing a game where the rules were written before you were born. Julia isn't your enemy. She's just more adaptable than you. She accepted the reality of her birth years ago. She made her peace with the shadows." I realized then that the black SUV following me hadn't been Julia's. It had been his. Vance wasn't just a lawyer, he was the puppet master. He was the one who had facilitated the biological verification 32 years ago. He knew exactly whose blood flowed in our veins. I backed away toward the kitchen, my hand tightening around the silver flash drive. If I'm not his son, then who is my father, Arthur? Was it the gardener? Or was it the man who's been protecting the family for 3 decades? Vance stopped. A flicker of something, anger or perhaps pride, crossed his face. "Your father was a king, and kings often need help securing their line. But you were always too much like your mother, emotional, reckless, obsessed with truth, in a world built on profitable lies." I didn't wait for him to finish. I grabbed a heavy glass decanter from the counter and hurled it at the floor between us. As the glass shattered, I bolted for the side door. I didn't take the main road. I plunged into the dark, rain-soaked woods, my lungs burning as I scrambled through the undergrowth. I reached my car, heart hammering, and tore out of the driveway just as the SUV's headlights swung toward me. I needed a secure place to see what was on that drive, but as I reached for my phone to call my own head of security, the screen flashed a notification that stopped my breath. It was a leaked news alert from a major financial portal. Keating Pharmaceutical, heir Elias. Keating under investigation for massive embezzlement. Internal audit reveals $50 million missing from Chicago Expansion Fund. The shadow secret had been flipped. They weren't just hiding the truth about my birth. They were using the very project I loved to bury me. My accounts were likely frozen. My name was being dragged through the dirt in real time. I pulled into a secluded gas station and plugged the drive into my laptop with trembling hands. The first file was a folder labeled "The Third Ear." I opened it, expecting more medical records. Instead, I saw a series of payments made over 20 years to a woman in Switzerland. And then a photo. It was a picture of my father, or the man I called my father, standing next to a boy who looked exactly like me. Not a little bit. Exactly. But the boy in the photo wasn't me. The date on the digital file was from last summer. I had a twin, or a clone, or a secret brother that the Keating Empire had been grooming in the shadows while I was being set up to take the fall. Part 5. The Swiss Paradox. The screen of my laptop cast a ghostly blue light over the interior of the car, reflecting off the rain-streaked windows. I stared at the photo of the boy in Switzerland. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was a mirror image of my own face from 15 years ago. But the metadata on the file was undeniable. It was taken 18 months ago at an elite boarding school in Lausanne. While I was out in the field, sweating over the logistics of the Chicago clinics and trying to earn my father's nod of approval, He had been funding a spare. A version of me that was clean, untainted by the legal wars of the Keating empire and hidden from the world. My phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. The police are at your apartment. Vance didn't just leak the embezzlement story. He planted the transfer logs on your personal laptop. Don't go home. I looked at the silver flash drive. It was no longer just a source of information. It was my only shield. I began to dig deeper into the Third Air folder. Underneath the photos were wire transfer receipts from a shell company called Leda Holdings. The signatory on the account wasn't my father. It wasn't Julia. It was my mother. The woman who had died in a tragic boating accident 10 years ago. The woman whose funeral I had wept at, whose casket I had helped carry. The wire transfers were dated as recently as last month. The air in the car suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen were being sucked out of the cabin. My mother was alive, or someone was using her identity to fund a secret son in Switzerland. I thought back to the scent of the floral perfume in the library in the mountain cabin. It wasn't an echo or a memory, it was a trail. Suddenly, a bright flash of light flooded my rearview mirror. A police cruiser pulled into the gas station, its blue and red lights painting the pavement in violent hues. My heart lurched. I couldn't be caught now, not with the drive, not with the questions I had. I shoved the laptop under the seat, threw the car into gear, and rolled slowly toward the back exit of the station, trying to remain invisible. As I passed the cruiser, the officer didn't look at me. He was focused on his terminal. But as I cleared the lot and accelerated into the darkness, my GPS screen flickered and changed. The destination home was deleted. A new coordinate appeared on the map, leading toward the industrial harbor on the outskirts of the city. A message popped up on the dashboard display. The signet ring Julia wears isn't a trophy, it's a key. Meet me at Pier 17 if you want to know whose son you really are. I looked at the ring Julia had been fiddling with in the office. The gold band with the Keating crest. My father had always told me it was a symbol of our bloodline. But if he was sterile, the bloodline was a lie. And if the ring was a key, what did it unlock? I arrived at Pier 17, a desolate stretch of rusted shipping containers and lapping black water. The SUV from the mountain was already there, its engine idling like a growling beast. The driver's side door opened, and a figure stepped out, draped in a long, dark coat. As the figure approached my window and lowered their hood, I felt the world dissolve. It wasn't Julia. It wasn't my mother. It was a woman I had seen in 100 family photos, the one person I thought was my only ally in the boardroom. My father's sister, Aunt Beatrice. She looked at me with eyes that held no pity, only a cold, calculating hunger. "You were always the smart one, Elias," she said, her voice like grinding stones. "But you're looking at the wrong secret. You're worried about who your father is. You should be worried about what he left in the vault of silence, and why Julia is willing to kill you to keep it closed." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet bag. Inside was a second signet ring, identical to Julia's. "There are 2 keys, Elias, one for the assets and one for the truth. Guess which one you just found?" Part 6. The Judas Twist. Beatrice dropped the second signet ring into my palm. It was cold, heavier than it looked, and bore the exact same microscopic scratch on the crest as the one I remembered on my father's hand. 2 rings, 2 keys. My mind raced. If Julia had the first and Beatrice had the second, then the war of succession wasn't a duel between siblings. It was a 3-way execution. "Why are you giving me this, Beatrice?" I asked, my grip tightening on the gold band. "You've spent 20 years playing the quiet aunt in the shadow of the Keating throne. Why come out of the dark now?" "Because Julia made a deal with Vance," Beatrice said, her eyes scanning the dark harbor. "She thinks she's the heir, but she's just the cleanup crew. Vance is using her to liquidate the pharmaceutical patents, the ones our father stole from a small research lab 30 years ago. If those patents are sold, the evidence of the theft disappears, and Vance walks away with $1 billion commission. You, Elias, are the only one with the legal standing to freeze the sale, but only if you can prove Vance isn't your legal guardian. I'm 35, Beatrice. I don't need a guardian. In the eyes of the trust you do, she hissed, leaning closer. The smell of her coat, damp wool, and that sharp floral perfume hit me again. The perfume. Our father signed an incapacity clause years ago. It states that if he dies, and his heirs are proven to be of uncertain lineage, the estate falls under the sole management of the family's lead counsel, Arthur Vance. The trap was perfect. Vance had convinced Julia she was winning, while simultaneously planting evidence that we were both illegitimate. He didn't want the Keating children to inherit. He wanted to be the Keating empire. "Go to the harbor master's office," Beatrice whispered, pointing to a small lit shack at the end of the pier. "There's a locker under the name Leda. Use the ring. Inside is the original partnership agreement between Vance and our father. It's the only thing that proves Vance was a silent partner in the Third Heir project." I didn't trust her, but I had no choice. I stepped out of the car, the rain drenching me instantly. I walked toward the shack, the signet ring feeling like a brand in my pocket. I found the locker. I pressed the face of the ring into a small, circular indentation in the metal door. Click. The door swung open, but there were no papers inside, no partnership agreements. Inside the locker was a single, high-end digital recorder and a stack of black and white photos. I picked up the photos first. They were shots of me and Beatrice, taken 10 minutes ago, right here on the pier. From the angle, it looked like I was handing her a large, unmarked envelope. It looked like a payoff. I pressed play on the recorder. "I'll do it, Beatrice." My own voice filled the small shack. "I'll kill the investigation. I'll make sure Julia takes the fall for the embezzlement. Just give me my cut of the Swiss accounts." My blood turned to ice. It was my voice, my cadence, but I had never said those words. Deep fake audio. I turned around, but Beatrice's SUV was already gone. In its place, 3 black sedans with government plates were pulling onto the pier, their sirens silent, but their intentions loud. I looked down at the locker one last time and saw a small detail I had missed. Stuck to the back of the locker was a small dried flower, a pressed lily. It was the same flower my mother always wore in her hair. As the car doors slammed and boots crunched on the gravel, I realized the Judas wasn't just Vance or Julia. It was Beatrice. She hadn't given me a key. She'd given me the murder weapon for my own reputation. And as the officers swarmed the shack, I saw a familiar figure standing behind them, shielded by a black umbrella. It was Arthur Vance. He checked his watch, the one he stole from my father, and gave me a small, mocking nod. "Timing is everything, Elias. You really shouldn't have tried to bribe your own aunt." Part 7. The Architecture of Betrayal. The interrogation room was a concrete box that smelled of stale coffee and the cold, metallic tang of fear. For 6 hours they played the recording. My own voice, hollow and distorted by the small speakers, sounded like a ghost haunting my own life. Every time I tried to explain about the Swiss photos, the infertility report, the signet rings, the lead detective just slid another photo of me and Beatrice across the table. "It's a frame-up," I whispered, my throat raw. "Look at the metadata on the digital files. Look at the audio frequencies. It's a deep fake." "We did look, Mr. Keating," the detective replied, leaning back. "And that's the problem. The encryption on that recorder is military grade. It's the same tech your father's pharmaceutical firm developed for secure government comms. If it's a fake built with your own company's tools." That was the masterstroke. Vance wasn't just using law, he was using our own innovations to hang me. Around 3 a.m., the door opened. I expected Vance, but it was Julia. She looked tired, her face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. She waved the detectives out, and for the first time in weeks, we were alone. She didn't sit down. She stood by the reinforced glass, her reflection overlapping with mine. "You really are a fool, Elias," she said softly. "Me?" You're the one working with the man who's stealing our father's soul, I hissed. Do you even know about the Swiss boy? Do you know that Arthur Vance is wearing father's watch while he plots to disinherit us both? Julia's expression didn't change. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, translucent medical vial. She set it on the table. I know about the sterility report, Elias. I found it months ago. I also know that you aren't my brother. I felt the air leave the room. What are you talking about? Father didn't just help the bloodline, as Vance says. He was obsessed with perfection. He didn't want a child, he wanted a successor. He used a surrogate and a donor from a list of high IQ candidates. But there was a mistake in the first batch, a genetic anomaly. She tapped the vial. You were the anomaly, Elias. I was the corrected version. That's impossible. We grew up together. We have the same eyes, the same... We have what the lab gave us, she interrupted, her voice trembling for the first time. But Vance knows the truth. He has the original donor contracts. He told me that if I didn't help him remove you, he would leak the anomaly report to the FDA. Every drug we've patented, every clinic we've opened is based on your genetic data. If you're proven to be faulty at the source, the empire collapses. We'd be billion-dollar paupers overnight. I looked at the vial. It wasn't just medicine, it was evidence of our manufactured existence. He's playing you, Julia, I said, leaning over the table. He doesn't care about the patents. He wants the third heir, the boy in Switzerland. That boy isn't an anomaly or a correction. He's the backup. Once we're both in prison or disgraced, Vance will bring him forward as the miraculously found, true son, and he'll have total control over a puppet king. Julia froze. The signet ring on her finger caught the light, and I noticed something. She was wearing it on her right hand now. She wasn't using her left hand anymore. The signature, I whispered. In the library, you signed with your left hand because you were injured, weren't you? Someone hurt you to make sure you followed the script. Julia slowly pulled back her sleeve. Her left wrist was a bruised mess of purple and black, the skin broken in the shape of a man's grip. He's not just our lawyer, Elias, she whispered, her eyes darting to the security camera. He's the one who killed Mother. And if we don't finish this tonight, we're next. Suddenly, the lights in the interrogation room flickered and died. The hum of the ventilation system cut out. In the sudden, oppressive darkness, I heard the heavy thud of the door's magnetic lock disengaging. A voice came over the intercom, but it wasn't the detective. It was Arthur Vance. Family reunions are so touching, he purred, the sound dripping with malice, but the anomaly needs to be erased, and the correction needs to learn total obedience. Officers, clear the floor. Part 8. The Vault of Silence. The darkness was total, a thick, suffocating velvet that smelled of ozone and old dust. I heard Julia's sharp intake of breath, then the sound of her chair scraping against the floor. Elias, she whispered, her voice trembling. He's not going to let us leave this room. The embezzlement was just the setup. This is the execution. Stay low, I commanded, my hands fumbling along the cold concrete wall. My mind was racing back to the totem, the grandfather clock in the Alpine house. Father always said that time was the only thing you couldn't bribe. I remembered the internal iron frame of that clock. It wasn't just a hiding place, it was a schematic. The door to the interrogation room creaked open. A beam of a high-powered tactical light sliced through the darkness, searching for us. I pulled Julia behind the heavy metal table just as a silenced round hissed through the air, shattering the glass of the observation window behind where her head had been a second ago. Vance wasn't using the police anymore. He was using his own private security, the cleaners who lived in the corporate shadows. We have to move, I hissed. The ventilation shaft. It's the only way out of this block. I can't, Elias. My wrist. You have to. Use your right hand. Think of the signet ring. It's not just a key, it's a weapon. I boosted her up into the narrow metallic crawlspace, her muffled groans of pain echoing in the duct. I scrambled up after her just as a second flashlight illuminated the room below. We crawled in agonizing silence, the smell of grease and cold air filling my lungs. After what felt like miles, we emerged into a maintenance closet near the building's rear exit. The precinct was a ghost town. Vance had used his corruption factor to clear the floor under the guise of a national security emergency. The Alpine House, I whispered as we reached the parking lot, crouching behind a row of impounded cars. We have to go back. There was something else in that grandfather clock. A second compartment I didn't open because Vance interrupted me. It's a trap, Elias. He knows you'll go there, Julia countered, clutching her bruised wrist. No. He thinks he has the flash drive. He thinks he knows everything because he built us. No, he forgot one thing. Our father was a right-handed man who obsessed over symmetry. Everything in that house is mirrored. We stole a nondescript sedan from the lot, a benefit of my operational training, and raced back toward the mountains. The storm had turned into a blizzard, the world outside a white blur of chaos. When we reached the cabin, the door was hanging off its hinges. Vance's men had already been here, tearing the place apart. The grandfather clock lay smashed on the floor, its guts spilled like a wooden carcass. It's gone, Julia cried, looking at the wreckage. I knelt beside the debris. I didn't look at the clock. I looked at the floorboard where the clock should have been standing. I felt for a small, raised knot in the wood. I pressed it, then twisted the signet ring I had taken from Beatrice into the grain. A small, hydraulic hiss echoed in the silent room. A section of the floor, hidden beneath the clock's original footprint, slid back. Inside wasn't another drive or a file. It was an old analog cassette tape, and a small glass slide with a drop of dried brown blood. "What is that?" Julia asked. "The third heir isn't a successor, Julia," I said, my voice shaking as I read the label on the tape. "The boy in Switzerland, he's not a twin, he's the donor, and this blood, it's not father's." I popped the tape into an old player on the desk. A voice filled the room, not my father's, but a younger, panicked Arthur Vance from 30 years ago. "Marcus, the boy is dead. The procedure failed. We need to swap the samples before the board finds out. We'll use the anomaly's blood for the patents. No one will ever know the Keating empire is built on the DNA of a ghost." The third heir in the photo wasn't alive. The photo I saw was a deep fake, a carrot Vance used to keep us running. The boy in Switzerland was a myth used to fund Vance's offshore accounts for decades. Suddenly, the lights of 3 SUVs flooded the cabin through the shattered door. Arthur Vance stepped out, his silhouette framed by the falling snow. He wasn't wearing his professional mask anymore. He looked like a wolf who had finally cornered his prey. "The ghost doesn't stay buried, does he, Elias?" Vance shouted over the wind. "Give me the tape. It's the only copy." "You killed my mother because she found out, didn't you?" I yelled back, standing in the doorway. "Your mother was a liability, just like you." Vance pulled a suppressed pistol from his coat. The anomaly and the correction have outlived their usefulness. Part 9. The Climax of Ashes. The blizzard roared through the open doorway, chilling the blood on the glass slide in my hand. Arthur Vance stood 10 feet away, his silhouette a dark blot against the blinding white of the SUV headlights. He held the suppressed pistol with the casual ease of a man who had erased lives before. "The tape, Elias," Vance said, his voice cutting through the wind like a blade. "Do you really think a piece of magnetic ribbon can stop a billion-dollar machine? I own the judges. I own the labs. I own the very ground you're standing on." "You don't own the truth, Arthur," I shouted back, stepping onto the porch. "My father was sterile, but he wasn't stupid. He knew you were a parasite. Why else would he leave this for me to find?" "He didn't leave it for you," Vance sneered, taking a step closer. "He left it as a confession for a god he didn't believe in. He was weak at the end. He started to believe in legacy, but legacy is just a lie we tell the dying." Beside me, Julia moved. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She stepped forward, her right hand visible in the light, the signet ring gleaming. You broke my wrist, Arthur. You killed my mother. And you thought I'd be your puppet because I was the corrected version?" Vance laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You are a puppet, Julia. Without the Keating name, you're just a lab-grown girl with no history and no future. Now, hand it over." "No," I said. I held the cassette tape up, then dropped it. Not into his hand, but into the glowing embers of the cabin's fireplace. Vance's eyes widened. For a split second, the professional predator vanished, replaced by a desperate man watching his immunity burn. He lunged toward the house, his gun hand dropping as he reached for the flames. That was the moment. I didn't tackle him, I didn't shoot him. I reached for the grandfather clock's heavy iron pendulum, which was lying among the wreckage. As Vance scrambled toward the fire, I swung the heavy lead weight with every ounce of rage I had stored for 35 years. It hit his wrist, the right one. The sound of bone snapping was louder than the wind. The Patek Philippe, my father's watch, shattered, its springs and gears flying like shrapnel across the floorboards. Vance screamed, collapsing into the ash and debris. "The tape was a copy, Arthur," I whispered, leaning over him. I pulled the silver flash drive, the real one, from my pocket. I uploaded the raw audio to the Chicago board's secure server 10 minutes ago. Every major news outlet in the country just got an encrypted link. Vance looked up, his face smeared with soot, his eyes wild with terror. You destroyed everything. The company. The stock will hit zero by morning. You've bankrupted yourself." "I don't care about the money," I said, looking at Julia. She was standing over him, her foot pinning his broken hand to the floor. "I'd rather be a pauper with a name than a prince in your cage." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Real sirens this time, coming from the valley. The state police, alerted by the server's emergency protocol. Vance began to crawl toward the door, but he stopped. He looked at the floor, at the shattered remains of the watch. "You think you won?" He wheezed, a bloody grin spreading across his face. "Check the slide, Elias. Check the blood. You were so worried about who your father was. You never asked who gave the anomaly his life." I looked at the glass slide in my hand, the dried brown drop of blood. "The donor wasn't a stranger, Elias," Vance whispered. "Look at the crest on the ring again. Look at the hidden engraving on the inside." I turned the signet ring over in the light of the dying fire. There, in tiny, microscopic letters, was a name I hadn't expected. Not Keating, not Vance. It was my mother's maiden name, and a date that preceded her marriage to Marcus Keating by 5 years. Part 10. The Genetic Paradox. The sirens were deafening now, their blue and red pulses reflecting off the mountain snow like a frantic heartbeat. Arthur Vance was dragged away in silence, his face a mask of ruined ambition, his broken wrist dangling like a dead weight. The Keating empire was a smoking crater. By sunrise, the shares would be worthless, the clinics would be seized, and the name Keating would be a synonym for the greatest medical fraud in history. Julia and I stood on the porch of the Alpine house as the first light of dawn grayed the horizon. She looked at the signet ring on her finger, then slowly slid it off and dropped it into the snow. "What will you do, Elias?" she asked. Her voice was hollow, the fire of the confrontation replaced by the cold reality of a life with no floor beneath it. "I'm going to find the truth," I said, looking at the glass slide in my hand. Vance's last words. He wanted to plant one final doubt, one last seed of rot. "And if the blood on that slide matches you," she whispered, "if we were never heirs but just experiments, then at least I'll know why I feel so out of place in a world of humans." I didn't tell her the rest. I didn't tell her that I had already looked at the engraving inside the ring. The name wasn't just my mother's maiden name. It was followed by a serial number, the same format as the third heir files in Switzerland. A month later, I sat in a small, sterile office in London. The high-end geneticist I'd hired sat across from me, his face unreadable. He pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk. "The results are in, Mr. Keating, or whatever you're calling yourself now." I scanned the data. The anomaly and the correction weren't just donor-funded children. We were the result of a closed-loop project. My mother hadn't been a victim of Elias Keating's obsession. She had been the lead scientist. She hadn't died in a boating accident. She had vanished into the Swiss project to continue the work. I was the biological twin of the third heir, but with one crucial difference. The anomaly in my DNA wasn't a mistake. It was a resistance to the very pharmaceuticals our father sold. I was the cure to the diseases my family grew rich on. I walked out into the London rain, the paper tucked into my pocket. I had no money. I had no empire. I was a man built in a lab, born from a lie and hunted by a ghost. I looked at my reflection in a shop window. I reached into my pocket and felt the small, cold weight of the signet ring. I realized then the ultimate paradox. My father didn't hate me because I was faulty. He hated me because I was the only thing in his life that he couldn't control with a checkbook. As I turned the corner, the scent of sharp, floral perfume hit me, identical to the one in the library, the one in the cabin. I stopped and looked through the crowd. A woman in a long, dark coat stood by a black sedan, her face partially obscured by a silk scarf. She didn't move. She just watched me. I realized then that the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a larger board. I am Elias Keating. I am the son of a king who wasn't my father and a mother who was my creator. They spent 30 years trying to erase me, but they forgot the most basic rule of science. You can never truly destroy the original. The blood doesn't lie, but it rarely tells the whole truth.